I don't think they are any more numerous today than perhaps they've ever been. I just recently finished a study on extreme religious movements in first century Rome. And I was astonished to find that same sense of anxiety in Roman society about what they saw to be the rise of Eastern cults in Rome. And the same questions were being raised. Why do people from good families get caught up with these groups? What is the power of these sort of gurus and leaders to attract people and so on? So my studies tell me that cults have always been there. They're like fleas on the bodies of main societies. They'll always be around. But what I think happens is that the public interest in them waxes and wanes. And whenever there's some sort of sensational revelation in the media, people begin to become alarmed and so forth. But the cults are always there. There's a history of people who have had some sort of expectation that life is not as just or as clear as what they believe it should be. So in a sense, you could say people who join cults tend to be strong. They tend to be people who have a higher than normal expectation of what life should really be about. And they tend to be people who maybe had a history of being troubled about issues like justice or issues of equity or issues that have to do with the environment and so forth. So if they are people who've got a slightly sensitised conscience, for example. So see, these are good people. These are strong, good people. And in that sense, the paradox is that cults attract people at their best. So if you go into a pub and talk to your average sort of working guy and say to him, look, I've got this, I want to tell you about this bloke who believes, you start talking about it. He'll look at you and say, that's bullshit. And that's the end of the story. That guy's not going to join a cult. But if you can say to this person, look, I've got this, and they go, oh yes, what about this? And you now are engaging that person intellectually. You see, that's a good person. That to me is a person who's alive, who's thinking, who's prepared to take risks. So in the end, we're dealing with one of the paradoxes of human beings, and the whole issue of cult membership really does take us to this strange ambiguity about human beings. If you're a great preacher, for example, a strong, charismatic sort of preacher, you're standing at the front of your church and someone comes up to you and says, you've changed my life. Now, right there begins a path that way down the track could lead to a sort of cultic situation. If that preacher begins to prize that and begins to look for it, begins to foster that, in fact, that person, in a sense, hasn't changed their life. What that person has said. So that role of religious leadership is a very powerful role, and this is why mainline denominations surround religious leadership with all manner of mechanisms of scrutiny and limitations and so forth, and that's why, in a sense, those seductions are kept in check generally. Whereas in an isolated group that heads off on its own, that prizes its secrecy and so forth, that can run amok. And you can get this sort of dance that begins to occur between the leader and the followers, and after a whole series of steps in certain directions, you can end up in the situation where you've got a cult. Religion is not just a thing of the mind. You know, Jesus didn't say, look, I just want you to believe a couple of things, that's it. He said it was a way of life. And that's true of every religion. Islam believes that in fact, Islam, more than most religions, sees itself working out as a political entity in the world. And I guess, in a sense, that is the goal of all religions. You don't, no clergyman wants simply to have people that sit in church and listen to his mutterings on Sunday morning and walk out as if nothing's happened. The clergyman wants her flock to actually live that out in the course of the week. And that's the goal of religion. So that's true of every religious group, and it's certainly true of cults. And in a sense, I think one of the reasons why the church finds the cult such hard going is because what happens in the cult is what every minister would love to happen in their people, in their church. Good grief! If you could give your average sort of suburban minister 10 people with that sort of drive, to live out every aspect of their belief in their daily life, you could change the world. I think society needs mad people, We need the characters that operate at the edges, the people who often take opposing views to what's regarded as the sort of normal, sensible belief of people. There's something strangely encouraging about a society that will tolerate eccentricities and even encourage people who believe bizarre things, because there is no such thing in the end as a totally evil belief system. There's always something in every group that I've ever come across, even the most extreme. There's always something that gives me reason to think, and I think there is something there. There is something there. And I think, in a sense, that's one of the keys to understanding what happens within the life of these groups, is that unless you can somehow find in yourself the beginnings of the seduction that has caused people to come from what seems to be in a normal life and suddenly hurl themselves into the midst of some of these extreme groups, unless you can sense that seduction, you're not going to understand what's happened. And understanding what's happened is actually strangely enlightening about us as human beings, and also about the society we live in. I think it's a mark of a mature liberal democracy that will allow all manner of beliefs to flourish in its midst. But that, of course, is dangerous, and more timid sort of minds, especially in the political arena, become frightened of that sort of diversity, and they see it as a type of chaos or a type of unmanageable anarchy. Now, that's the risk you run. But then to move on the other side and say, well, let's regulate belief, I see that as perhaps even more dangerous. Oh, there's a lot of similarities in Kenja with Scientology. In fact, when I hear Ken Dyers speak, I hear a lot of his roots going back into Scientology, because he did spend some time in Scientology, and I think he's quite happy to admit that. He believes, he has a fairly similar belief about the nature of the soul, or that the Scientologists believe that the thing that defines us is the Thetan, and the Thetan is a sort of immortal spiritual being that comes and goes through many lives, and that this body, in fact, Scientologists talk about our bodies in quite derogatory terms. They talk about them as meat, and they talk about this meat world and so forth. But so the body is like a vehicle, and in that sense, they see the Satan as the defining nature of who you are. And it's a bit like an angel trapped in a slot machine. The real essence of a person is that Satan. And that's what Scientology is directed to, is the healing of the Satan, the damaged creature that sits within a human being. And I think that's what Ken Dyers is talking about and striving for. And what frustrates that process of healing is various spiritual forces, like demons, like attached spirits, as they say. Now, Ken Dyers, but that's a common belief between Scientology and Kenja.